Today's guest is living proof that yes, ADHD can take you to some of the darkest places and also to the highest peaks. Jack Thompson, known around the world as the ultra cyclist, has broken records on his bike that most of us, including me, can't even imagine. But behind the triumphs is a story of struggle, addiction, and survival. In this episode, Jack opens up about growing up with an undiagnosed ADHD and the chaos that led him to drug use and the powerful shift that helped him trade destructive highs for life-changing endurance. In this story, he shares about his amazing relationship with his parents, which I really think the advice that he gives in this episode, we all need to hear. So this isn't a story just about cycling. It's about hope. It's about resilience and what every parent of children with ADHD needs to know as they navigate this journey that can feel really hard sometimes. Let's do it. Welcome, Jack. I am so excited for our chat today.
Yeah, thank you. It's great to be here. And I know we met a couple of months ago and I'm looking forward to this chat.
So to start off by telling our gorgeous listeners who you are and what you do.
So my name is Jack Thompson. I'm originally from Perth. I'm a professional cyclist. I'm a professional ultra cyclist. It means we ride really long distances all around the world, trying to break records, crossing countries, trying to see how fast we can climb mountains. But there's another side to me. I'm also, I was diagnosed with ADHD quite late in life, and it was a real turning point for me as a person, but also as part of my career.
I was, listening to you talk at the ADHD Professionals Association conference, and I was looking, and then after your talk, I was looking up ultra cycling. It is wild. Like, I think people need to Google that. Like, it is a lot. It's not just like riding a bike up a mountain. It's like really like heavy duty endurance stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, it can be very long days and weeks on a bike. I guess it's not uncommon to ride 500 kilometers in a day and do that for a couple of days back to back, somewhere weird and wonderful in the world, somewhere quite remote. It probably sounds more luxurious than it is. It can be really bloody hard out there, to be honest.
Okay, so before I get too excited with all my questions, I'd love for you to paint a picture of what it was like in your school years, because I want to take people on a little bit of a journey of how you got to where you are, right? So talk about your school years. What was it like for you going through your schooling? Did you have any strengths that you can remember, struggles, misunderstandings, or any moments that stick out to you in your schooling journey?
Yeah, school for me was a real struggle. I kind of realized that around age 13 or 12 or 13, or my parents probably picked up that I'd developed some sort of tics. They were like these little rituals that I had to do. And I'd sort of convinced myself that if I didn't do them, certain things were going to happen. So I guess I was trying to get some sort of sense of control. I suffered quite badly from depression. And what we found was, just by chance, sport was something that really helped me. We didn't realize at the time that I had ADHD. I wasn't diagnosed until much later in life at 34, 35. And so we sort of realized, if I played a lot of sport, I actually kept my mental health in a really good place. I never felt like I fitted in at school. I was always, didn't enjoy socializing with the other kids. I really struggled to concentrate on what was happening on the projector or on the screen in front of me. But I always had this sort of something to look forward to at the end of the day, which was the sport. And so this kept me in a really good place until I got to my final year at school and decided, I guess there was societal pressure to go to university. And I decided I needed to give the sport away to go and study. And the family, I guess, noticed that my mental health really deteriorated from there. And then I guess the next chapter of my life started. I don't know if we want to get into that now or I can expand on. Yeah, I gave away the sport, got into university, turned 18. As all teenagers do, they start going out, partying, having fun. And I realized that I really enjoyed having a lot of fun, and the partying became a bit of an obsession. I started using drugs and basically developed an addiction to the party drugs. At the time, I was still studying, so I was still kind of keeping it together, but I wasn't in a good place. I was using the drugs to try and escape life. I wasn't enjoying life. And I ended up going into rehab. So I was lucky that my parents actually realized something was wrong. They confronted me about it. And because I'd always had a very close relationship with my parents, I actually, took their advice and went into rehab. And when I was in rehab, I kind of just realized, this is a bit of a waste. Like, what am I doing in here? I really should be trying to do something with my life. And I was just lucky that when I came out of rehab, my dad had said to me, look, why don't you get back on a bike? Growing up, I'd enjoyed riding a bike. It's what had kept me in a good place mentally. And you know what it's like as a teenager, you don't really want to listen to your parents, but just with that gentle guidance, I ended up giving in, and I went for one ride with him and I fell in love with it again. And again, with his support, I decided that, I actually wanted to follow a career in professional cycling as opposed to a career in what I'd studied, which was the construction management and the economics. And I've sort of forged my way down that path and made a real career out of it. And then the ADHD diagnosis came at age 35. So that was, another real a real pivotal point in my life. I was a professional athlete and I was surviving, but I really wasn't thriving. I felt like life was always very much, I was playing the game of life with one arm tied behind my back. I never really had full access to my full potential. And when I had the diagnosis and I went down the medication route, it was like I suddenly had both hands and I could really grasp onto the things that I wanted to do, and suddenly everything felt possible. And it was the single greatest thing that's ever happened to me was that diagnosis and the subsequent treatment plan.
Oh, I've got so many questions, and thank you so much for sharing your story so vulnerably, because I think this is, I want to go in straight to the heart of what parents' fears are. So parents listening to this podcast might have the fear that their children are going to get involved in drugs. We hear it in the media all the time, right? Like people, there's this kind of misconception that that stimulant medication is going to somehow lead to making their child a drug addict. When we actually know the science, well, number one, that doesn't align with your story because you weren't diagnosed with ADHD then. We possibly could have avoided some of the hurt that you had you had a diagnosis earlier, potentially, maybe. I don't know. How do you feel about it?
Absolutely. Look, my trajectory would have been completely different.
And then, so parents are having that fear because that's fed into them by the media. But they also, we know that the science actually shows that not treating ADHD can lead to addiction because people self-medicate, they develop unhealthy coping mechanisms. And the ADHD brain often chases stimulation. Do you feel like that chasing stimulation, albeit in a little bit of a destructive way, probably not a little bit, do you think that contributed to your addictions?
Yeah, for sure. If I look back at my past, there was the partying, which was, the wanting that stimulation. I wasn't getting it elsewhere. I felt flat all the time, like I was missing something and I needed to get it elsewhere. You can't see it, but I have tattoos all over me. And that was from that period in time when I was chasing that stimulation. I wanted the excitement and I wasn't getting it elsewhere in life. But then also the sport. I became very obsessive about the sport while I was at school and competed at a very high level while I was at school. And that was before the drugs, before the tattoos. That was the only real thing giving me the stimulation. And so I think for parents, the importance of the sport, or maybe it's the music, or maybe it's the extracurricular activity, is perhaps it's not recognized how important that part of schooling is for a child's life.
I'm so glad you brought that up. Can you tell me a little bit about your experience?
You know, when you do turn 18, I think most of us, most of the listeners have been through that sort of age. Going out is something that everyone kind of does, or most people, they do that. I think it's not uncommon for people to go and drink too much. You're at that age where you're sort of experimenting. Maybe you try something once and that's kind of enough. It puts you off it. I guess my ADHD brain almost became a bit obsessive about things that were giving me the stimulation. So where, a non-ADHD person may have tried something once or may have, gone out once a week, I sort of found, I needed to do it more because I realized that it was giving me some sort of high and that I wanted to chase that high. And I think that's where I think not being treated for ADHD is what potentially, you know, led me down that path of wanting to experiment more with the drugs. Had I been diagnosed with ADHD at a much younger age, I think my my sense of self, my sense of control, my sense of stimulation, it would have been, I guess, met. I wouldn't need to have gone and done the other. And I look at myself now compared to 2 years ago before the diagnosis as well. There's so many things that I realized about myself that, wow, I was only doing that because I was chasing that stimulation or because I was chasing that buzz. Now I've got absolutely no interest in it. And, life is far more enjoyable.
If you could take us back to that moment you said you went to rehab. What was that moment? Obviously you said your parents, you maintained a great relationship with your parents, which I think is just so wonderful and a credit to them and you that you guys were able to maintain that connection despite all that you were going through and navigating at that time. But was there a particular moment, people describe like rock bottom. They talk about a
Mm.
moment that was a tipping point that they were like, now you're going to rehab. What was there a specific moment or was it a lot of other moments?
There was a very specific moment. So I recall it very clearly. I arrived home from work. So I was still living with my parents at the time. Just for context, so I was studying, but in Perth at the time, there was a bit of a construction boom. So everyone that was studying basically had a job in construction. So we were doing uni 2 days a week, working 3 or 4 days a week in and around the university. So I'd got home from work, gone up to my bedroom and laid out on my bed was the drugs that I'd been using. And what had happened was my parents had suspected something. They'd spoken with some friends who had, at the time, I was so angry about it, but my friends had sort of explained to my parents that I was a little bit off the rails. And they'd gone through my room and found, I guess, my supply. And I remember going downstairs knowing that, wow, there's an explosion about to happen here. And my dad just very calmly said to me, "Look, I think we better go out and grab some dinner." We jumped in the car. We went for a bit of a drive. There was no talk of what had happened. It was just this little bit of tension in the air. And I sort of knew that the discussion was going to happen, but the way that he dealt with it was he never kind of exploded at me. We sat down, ordered some dinner, and then I guess we got down to business. And he said to me, "Look, unless you stop doing what you're doing, then we won't continue to support you. Really, we don't agree with what you're doing." And he said to me, "You've always been a integral part of this family. There's only two of us, my brother and I." And he said, "We really don't want to lose you to this, but I think you really need to reconsider your choices." And because we'd always had that strong relationship with him, we really respected it when I'd never had this type of discussion with him before, but it caught me off guard that we were sitting there and he was, I guess, telling me that they didn't want to have anything they didn't want to support me moving forward if I was going to continue down this road. And he said, "Look, I think you need to go into rehab." And basically overnight, I said, "All right, I'm going to, family means much more to me than the drugs or the partying ever have, and I'm going to give it away." The hardest thing for me was when I gave it away, I really did hit rock bottom. I'd become very reliant on what I was using. And also, I guess, my social group was very much involved in that scene as well. And so when I stopped using, I also lost, I guess, my friendship group, if you want to call it that. And it was probably a very good thing that I lost that friendship group. And I guess I started again, but I went into the rehab facility. I remember I was very nervous about it all. It all felt very, I guess, taboo, the word rehab and being kind of in hospital and, yeah, not knowing what laid ahead. I guess it was like my records had been wiped. That's how it felt for me. And I remember one day I was looking out the window. There was an older lady at one end of the courtyard. I just remember this so clearly, so I think it's worth recalling. She was there, very ill. She was being pushed in a wheelchair by her daughter. And at the other end, they were doing some construction at the hospital, and there was some young guys having fun, mucking around on the building site, as you see, and as young guys do. And I just remember thinking, like, what am I doing in here? Like, I feel like a caged animal. I'm stuck in hospital, and I'd seen this lady at one end of her life, and I'd seen these young guys at the other end of theirs having fun and enjoying things. I thought, I'm just wasting my time. I really need to get out and do something. The problem was I just didn't know what I wanted to do. And it was only when my dad encouraged me, look, why don't you get back on that bike? You really enjoyed that when you were young and you were good at it. And I eventually gave into that suddenly I had this, I guess it was something that I became hyper focused on. And I think that's the superpower in ADHD, is the ability to hyper focus. And if you can channel that hyper focus into something positive, not the drugs, not the alcohol, but the career or the hobby or the sport or whatever it might be, it really is a superpower. You can do whatever you want with it. And yeah, the rest is, I guess, history.
I want to get into cycling because I can see that your whole face lit up when you were talking about that. And I really want for people to understand like what that means to you and what that looks like on a day-to-day basis, because I think it's pretty incredible. But first, I'm going to backtrack one step. What made you get an ADHD diagnosis?
So it was actually, I was on a project in WA, an ultra cycling project. And one of the things I've been passionate about, having sort of come out of the rehab, is using my cycling to try and give back. And so we raised, one year we raised €500,000 for 3 charities. Another year we visited a bunch of schools as part of a project, and I went and spoke with the kids about the power of having a dream and working towards achieving that dream. And it was at the end of that project, I was in the car with one of the project sponsors, who was a company, Okia, in Perth, which is they run basically a psychology, psychiatry clinic, an ADHD clinic. And the owner had said to me, look, have you ever been diagnosed, or have you ever considered going and being tested for ADHD? And I just laughed at it. I thought, no, at school I was never hyperactive. I just kind of didn't want to be there. I was just interested in other things. And so I never assumed, or my parents never assumed, that maybe I had ADHD. And he kindly said to me, look, if you're ever interested in coming and doing the testing, then we'd be happy to help make that happen. And I sort of went away and I thought, well, what have I got to lose by going and doing it? And I appreciate that it is very hard for people to get in and do that testing. And I was very fortunate that opportunity came about, but I jumped at it and went through it all. And I remember doing the questionnaire, and I was like, "Yep, that's me, that's me, that's me." I thought, "Wow, maybe I do have this." And the diagnosis came back as combined ADHD. And then the next part was, how do we treat that? And that's kind of when we started exploring the medication.
When you got that diagnosis back, what were the feelings like? What, because a lot of times people describe to me, they go kind of through this sequence of emotions. What was those feelings that you felt?
For me, it was, so I guess I was very nervous before the diagnosis, because once I started answering those questions, I started listening to audiobooks, because I've never been able to read a normal book. But I started listening to audiobooks on ADHD, and the more I listened, the more I started to identify with a lot of the characteristics of the authors. And I was actually nervous going into the diagnosis that, wow, what if I'm not ADHD? Then I'm going to feel really lost. And so when I did get the diagnosis, it was a real sense of, I guess, for the first time in my life, I felt like I was seen, like there was a reason that I was the way I was, and that a lot of things started to make sense. It was like the Tetris blocks were kind of all falling into place a little easier than they were before, and it was, I guess, it was a relief, but like a sense of I've now got an answer, and I now have a bit of a pathway that I can follow to try and work through this. So it was, yeah, really a pretty big day in my life now looking back.
Oh, amazing. So then you were already cycling by this stage. And so how can you paint a bit of a picture about what sort of commitment ultra cycling is? Because I feel like when I heard you talk about it, I was like, hold on, this isn't just like a bike ride. This is a lifestyle.
Yeah.
That it's quite serious, right? So I want you to paint a picture about, what it requires from you on a day-to-day basis.
So typically in a week, I'd spend anywhere from a training week, 20 to 30 hours a week actually on the bike. So that's just training hours. I think what most people don't understand about the ultra cycling is there's no, I guess, if you think of the Tour de France, there's a team behind a rider in the Tour de France. There's the sponsors, there's they get to the end of the stage and they kind of get handed the bottles and da-da-da-da. The ultra cycling is very much, it is a team sport at the end of the day, in that I'll have a doctor with me, I'll have somebody driving a car, I'll have somebody that might be helping prepare food. But the sponsorship side of things is like a business in itself. I'm constantly looking for angles with sponsors and trying to, you have to fund these things. So
Yeah.
to spend, next year we have a project that'll be 3 months on the road in the US, riding all around the US. It's expensive, and there's the sponsorship side of things that you need to fund these projects. So I'd say like the cycling aspect is 20 to 30 hours a week, and then the computer aspect of it is probably another 30 or 40 hours a week, like being realistic. There's the content game, which is creation of the videos and the social media bits and pieces. I was kind of doing it all before, but I wasn't really doing it really well. And I think when I got diagnosed, it was like suddenly I could really, all right, I've got the cycling, I've got the sponsors, I've got the social media, and I could manage all three of them all at once. Before it was like, oh yeah, I'm really excelling with the cycling, but the sponsorship stuff's not going. So I couldn't do it all. And I think, I guess they call it like privateering. You're a private athlete and you've got to kind of manage it all. You don't have a team or a federation behind you. The diagnosis and the subsequent medication has made that all a lot easier. And it is hard work, but I love it. Like, I don't feel like I'm going to work. I feel like I'm constantly doing a hobby, and I love it.
Now, when we started this podcast, you were talking about kind of like obsessive traits, going all in, which it sounds like you're definitely all in on this, right? And you're amazing at it. I've seen your social media, and your social media is on point, right? Like it's great.
Thank you.
It's so engaging. How do you go switching gears between ultra cyclist, all the amazing things you're doing, and any sort of social relationships or love life relationships, and those sorts of things, going back to that gear, or managing family, and how this is?
To be honest, before, a couple of years ago, I was not good at it. Relationships really struggled. I was so all in on the cycling that I couldn't manage everything else. And now I think everything in life is about that balance, the equilibrium. And I think finding that equilibrium now, I guess, as well as I've gotten older, I've perhaps calmed down a little bit, or I like to think I've calmed down a little bit, and I understand the importance of my relationship, and my wife is very understanding. She's actually a psychologist, so she
Oh, I
probably
mean, well
understands me better than most. But yeah, I guess having her support has been really helpful. But I think for everyone, like managing work, managing relationships, managing family, it is sometimes a bit of a juggling act, whether we have ADHD or not. And I think, I just like to think that for those of us that do have the ADHD or have children with ADHD, there's often this stigma attached to the medication and, treating the ADHD in a certain way. And we were listening to something last night, actually laying in bed, and it was a professor talking about, children with ADHD, and it said he likes to look at it as though if you were a child and you needed glasses and you were never given the glasses, life would be really hard. Like you'd really struggle with it. And the same can be said about the ADHD that, if you don't treat it and it's not diagnosed and you don't, medication's one component, but there's also the exercise, the nutrition, there's lots of other components that go with it. If you're not treating those how they should be treated, compare it to the child without the glasses. Like life is hard. And I think what you're doing is great with this podcast and, getting the family unit talking about the ADHD and exploring, the avenues for diagnosis and treatment. And yeah, I just hope that that stigma is changing and it's not seen as something that's doom and gloom. It's actually, wow, my child's got a superpower and we just need to work out how to harness it.
I love that you talked about the other components too, because, in ADHD coaching, we talk about like the slab of the house, right? So you get your slab right. So when you build a house, you make sure that the slab's right. So the slab in the house is sleep, diet, exercise, time in nature, right?
Yeah.
And so, and if you don't have those things like as best as they can be, then everything else becomes a little bit variable and it's a little bit more unpredictable, right? So we try and get those things right to be able to support people to manage it in a more kind of consistent way. And then when you partner alongside, the psychiatrist and the developmental peds, so they can manage the medication part and we can help manage with the executive function part. So it's super exciting. I love that you just said that too, because it really highlights how you've been able to navigate your way around this using sport. You naturally had that inclination as a child going through school that you use one of the slabs of the house.
Yeah. I think it's interesting looking back, like we never knew that we were doing that, but you kind of gravitate to what works. And for me, it was the sport. But I don't know, for other kids, it's like the musical instrument, or it might be the, something. Doesn't have to be the sport. I think that's the important thing.
Yeah, they've got to have
just finding what it is.
Yeah. Okay, so parents listening to this may feel a little bit powerless, right? So their kids are doing some pretty risky things. I don't know. In the last 12 months, I have been to that emergency room, I'm going to say like 11 times, right? With just wild things, right? There's risky behaviors all over the shop. And so this is one of the things that is a risky behavior, experimenting, and comes along, especially with the teenage group as well. We see this a little bit more, and the lines get a bit blurred between ADHD and normal risk-taking behavior and boundary pushing and things. But I imagine that there's some parents listening to this feeling a little bit powerless, and they're watching their children make some very interesting choices as they're growing up. What would you say to them in their moment of despair?
That is a good question. Like, I think looking back, the most important things for me was that my parents were never really pushy with me. They never really told me, you have to do this, you have to do that. It was more gentle guidance. Do you think that's a good decision? As opposed to, no, don't do that. You're not allowed to do that. The way that they did that at the time, I didn't think anything of it. And I don't even know if they were doing it on purpose. But psychologically, putting it back in our court to make the decision and, giving their spin on it, their guidance, almost made you second guess yourself. And that was like, maybe I am doing something wrong. Had my parents shouted at me, had they got angry at me, as a teenager, I probably would have given them the two middle fingers and, gone and done it because they were trying to stop me. So I think not exploding is perhaps one of the most powerful things that they ever did. It was more that sort of gentle, I don't know if that's the right thing to do. And then I second guessed myself. And then I had a lot of respect for mum and dad because they were there to support me when things were hard. And when we wanted to play sport, they were always, they'd take us down there and they'd sit there for hours and watch us. And, I had a lot of respect for them. But I think, I see it now I'm now at that age where I've got friends with kids and we don't have kids, but sometimes you see the parents kind of exploding at the kids, and I think, well, I wouldn't react too well to that if I was a child. So I guess what I'm trying to say is perhaps controlling the emotion, not getting really angry at the children, but also having that sort of level of respect with them that this is not okay, this is okay, and allowing them some freedom as well is I really think what was beneficial for me growing up.
So you talked there about, you mentioned the word respect, right? Which is really, really, and you even said it at the start, I had a lot of respect for my dad, so I listened to him. How do you think your parents maintained that respectful relationship? I know that they handed over autonomy, right? They gave you a lot of autonomy. Like, they gave you their opinion, but they also gave you the ability to decide, which we know ADHD and autonomy, like everyone in autonomy, right? We like to make our own decisions, but for ADHD, it's particularly important. How did they maintain that respectful relationship with you, even when I'm sure there was some stuff that was going down that they really wanted to like lose it over?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I struggle to find the answer. Like, I think to myself, if I had children, how would I? And it's difficult to pinpoint what it was. I think there's the giving us that level of autonomy. They were also, even now, like, my parents are my parents, but they're also friends, and I don't know how they did that. It's really like they did it really well, but they're even growing up, like sometimes, for example, like if a teacher got a little bit angry at you or something, and you'd come home and say, "Oh, Mr. Shan got a bit angry at me for this." Sometimes my parents would side with me. Sometimes they'd side with Mr. Shan or whoever the teacher was, and it always felt like there was a little bit of give, a little bit of take, and it was always very kind of level. I think we built respect out of that because they weren't always siding with the teacher, for example. Sometimes they would agree with us. And that was also the same with the sport. Like, sometimes we'd say, "Oh, can we go for a surf?" We used to surf growing up, and they'd say, no, today it's a little bit wild out there today, boys. Like, I don't think it's good to go out. But then, another time they'd say, yeah, no, you can go out, but we're just going to come over. And there was always kind of this, they respected us enough to give us the autonomy, but then we respected them when they decided that, we didn't deserve the autonomy or that it wasn't the right time for the autonomy. And it was very subtle. Like, looking back now, it's even hard for me to really pinpoint it, but I think that was powerful.
Yeah, I think what you're describing there is that they treated you with respect. And so
Yeah.
you treated them with respect, right?
Yeah,
Which
I
didn't
think,
mean that they
yeah.
stayed silent. They told you what they thought was best, but they did it in a really nice, respectful way.
Yeah, I think, like, they never treated us as kids. It was like we were adults as well, and they would treat us like adults, and that, like, yeah, they respected us, and then in return we would respect them. And I think they never kind of belittled us for having a silly decision or a silly idea. It was like, well, maybe that's not the right idea for this and it was always very, very level, I guess. Like, they were our parents, but they were also supporting us. It was always, I think you've kind of nailed it there. Like, they respected our decisions and our wants and needs as well.
Now I kind of want to interview your parents for part 2 of this podcast.
Yeah, I think that'd be it. My mum's going through the ADHD diagnosis process now. So having been diagnosed, she's now going and being diagnosed because she's now seeing that perhaps she's got a lot of the characteristics as well.
Oh,
That would be an
wow.
interesting one.
Yes. Okay. Well, hook us up with that one. What was a really tumultuous journey into world records? Can you tell us about the highlights of your career?
Yeah, so we've done some. I say we because there's always a bit of a. I've always got people there with me filming or supporting and sponsors and whatnot. We've broken 9 or 10 different world records. Fastest crossing of countries, most elevation meters climbed in a calendar year. Just 2 weeks ago, I was in northern India in the Himalayas. We climbed the 3 highest roads in the world. So for me, that's a bit of a career highlight. Like that was so wild. It was so extreme. We're up close to 6,000 meters in the snow, 1 in the morning. My dad was there. Yeah, the team was on oxygen. I was trying to. It was just like it's crazy scene. But then we've also what have we done? We've ridden the length of Japan. We hold the record crossing Japan. We've raised a bunch of money for the charities. My real passion now is using the projects to engage with children. So similar to what we did on the Mundavidi project, but also in the corporate world, I really want to chat with corporates around this idea of sounds cliche, but the goal setting, having the dream, and balancing that with the work. And so the public speaking side of things is something that I'm really leaning into. The cycling can sometimes be very, I don't want to say one dimensional, but it's very much about me, and I'll go out there and I'll do it and I'll achieve something. I get a lot more enjoyment out of doing something where lots of people can kind of benefit from it. And so, we've got some big things planned for next year, both in Australia and in the US. So hopefully we can keep that momentum going and, get more people, just getting the most out of life.
Amazing. Now, if you were just thinking about the parents that are listening to this, if you want them to take one thing away from your story and everything that you've been through, what would that be?
I think if I had to choose one, I'd say that the ADHD is often people often look at ADHD as something that's, a bit of a setback, or my son or my daughter's struggling. I think if we can completely flip that and say, look, my child has this superpower and we just need to work out how to harness it. I think that's the one thing that I'd love parents to realize, that like this is something special. Like, life might be difficult and it might be, hard at the moment while we figure things out, but there's so much potential for my child to go on and do something amazing. And we just need to, work out what that is, and looking at it as a positive thing is the takeaway I'd love, a parent to leave with.
I love that so much. So I want everyone to go and follow you and, on social media, and check out your website and show your kids videos of Jack doing all the crazy stuff that he does, right? Show them like a wonderful role model for, it's so good for kids to be able to see other people with ADHD in the spotlight, doing things, pushing themselves to the absolute limits. And I also have a side question. Like, have you ever thought, when you've been racing, like, have you ever thought, I've gone too far? Like, this is
Yeah. In the Himalayas 2 weeks ago.
Oh no, 2 weeks ago.
Yeah,
It's very recent.
wild. Yeah. Hands were just ice blocks and dizzy, and I thought, what am I doing up here? Like, I've got a wife back at home, I've got a dog, I've got like this nice life, and why am I here just digging myself a hole?
I just had to ask that question, Jack. I just could imagine it. I was like, some of the things that I've seen you do on your social media, I was like, I wonder if he ever thinks, not today. This is a bit much.
More often than you think.
So I'd love for people to go and follow you and to show their kids what is possible. And I love your message too, because it can be a bumpy road and it can be a hard thing for the individual and also for parents to navigate, but it can also be something truly magnificent and inspirational and incredible. And when you find your thing, I like it so much that you talked about your thing, right? Like you found sport and you're able to come back to it multiple times throughout your life. We can support our kids to find whatever their thing is too.
Absolutely.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time today, Jack. Where can we find you?
Best place is Instagram. So Jack Ultra Cyclist.
I'm going to be sharing that in the show notes and a link to your website as well. Is there any other place you want to direct us to?
I guess there's the YouTube as well. If you want some longer form content, a lot of the YouTube content has it's the cycling, but then there's the second storyline built into the cycling, which is the mental health component. So if nothing on Netflix takes your fancy and you feel like some YouTube, then it's Jack Ultra Cyclist. And like for parents, if there's parents with questions or I'm an open book. I'm more than happy to, if you want to send me a message, to get back to you and just sort of share a little bit more about my story, and I hope that it'll help you or your child.
Thank you so much for being so incredibly vulnerable and inspiring today. It has been awesome chatting with you.
No, thanks so much for having me. I love what you do.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the ADHD Families Podcast. If you loved it, please share it on your socials. I want this to start a conversation about ADHD. If you want to make this mum do a little happy dance, please leave a review on iTunes. If you would like to know more about what we do, check out thefunctionalfamily.com. I truly hope that you enjoyed this podcast and you use it to create a wonderful, effective, joyful life with your beautiful children.